Greetings, Embers, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. Before I get started, I would like to shout out the reformed members of the channel. Howler's mom, Tina Mead, Seven, Luz Crispin, Tammy Slayton, CAG, Denise Sass, Through Scrutiny, Samantha Play, Stephanie McLaren, Corpse Lover, Norman DW, Chrissy Elias, Cindy Cleveland, and Patty's niece. If you would like to learn how to become a member of the channel or would like to buy me a coffee as a special thank you, those links can be found down below. As well, if you are new here and enjoying what you are hearing or have been here already, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Not only does it help the channel out, but it also reminds you of every time I upload a video. Also, please don't forget that Back to Ashes is now on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Every time I upload a video, the audio will be uploaded to Apple Podcast and Spotify for your enjoyment. The links to those platforms can be found down below. With all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin, entitled True Haunted House Stories. Right after this intro, an ad will play. I'll read the first story and ad will play, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. Some members of my family built a house in the country back in the early 90s. Strangely, there had historically been 2 previous houses which had burned down. I don't know if anyone died either time, but I have my suspicions. As they were building the house, a neighbor approached and plainly told them that their house was going to burn down. It was like the first thing anyone said to them about their house. The house still exists and they still live there, but there have always been some weird going-ons in the house. My mother was studying for a college test and heard a ball bouncing against the wall in one of the children's rooms. She called for the child to stop throwing the ball, forgetting that they were at school. As she did so, the ball rolled down the bedroom hallway, toward the living room, and into her line of sight. She was alone in the house. My brother and I were once in the basement room when we saw the face of something. Human-like for sure, but completely dull and lifeless. In the storm window, the little 18-inch tall window at the ceiling in some basement rooms. There is no way that a face could have been there because the storm window is only like 18 inches deep and the face was oriented normally. Sleeping in this house is a real nightmare. As a child, I would feel things brushing my arms and legs when I slept. There was this awful Mrs. Beasley doll that the mother before had that I swear would follow you with its head as you walked around. There is more stuff, but I really just want to know how you could build a pre-haunted house. I mean, it's in rural Missouri. That shit just doesn't seem likely, but I have seen it and felt it, so I don't know. What do you think? I had a long talk with my dad last night about the house I grew up in. I lived there from about ages 6 to 15. I'm 21 now. Apparently, the previous owner was a recluse and mentally ill. He killed himself with a shotgun in my bedroom next to the window. There's a bleach spot there on the hardwood floor that I always had covered up with a chair. His brother would check on him periodically, but this time didn't for about 3 weeks. Then came over and found him dead. My dad found this out after we moved in. He said a police officer came up to him when he was doing yard work and said, "Don't let the history of this place scare you. It's a beautiful property." And my dad was like, What? Needless to say, I'm creeped the fuck out. I don't remember ever feeling unsafe in that house, but the lock on my door had locked itself numerous times during the first year we lived there. I vividly remember being locked inside there with my friend one day, and firefighters had to come and pull us out the window. After that, my father straight up took the doorknob off, so I had no doorknob growing up. There were also crosses above my sister and I's door that I really never questioned, but apparently my dad had a priest come over and bless the doorways. This affected my dad a lot. One day, he was doing roof work on a ladder right outside my window, perfectly in control, when the ladder just folded and slipped sideways, and he fell 10 feet and almost died. And when my parents got divorced and my mom took my sister and I to live somewhere else, my dad lived there alone for about 2 years. He said it got so disturbing he finally had to move. He said that when he came home from work at night, though, the basement, it would just reek of smoke. The man was a smoker when alive. The scent was so strong he thought someone had broken into the house. But then my dad would go upstairs and come back down as a test, and the smell would be gone. I'm just a little spooked finding out I lived in a room where this had happened, especially since my own suicide attempt took place in that room. Just kind of a mind fuck. Does anyone else have positive stories in this kind of spirit moving on after something like that? I'm having a hard time processing all of this and just hope the man is at rest now. For some context, my whole life, my mother has told me snippets of her childhood. From what I've learned from her, my father, and eavesdropping on family conversations, my mother had a terrible childhood. A grandfather who was sexually abusive, and a junkie mother who left her home alone for days at a time. It wasn't until she was 17 that she was able to escape. In her mid-20s, she met my father, and they got married. They tried for years to have children, but had been told they would never have children. Then, on March 26, 2001, my grandmother had an overdose in what is now my parents' bedroom. We don't know if it was accidental or purposeful, but they believe accidentally. The next day, the 27th, was the date put on her death certificate. Exactly 1 year later, my parents had their first child, me. Growing up, I didn't know anything about my grandmother besides her name. That is, until one day, I was in the 4th grade going through our home library. I came across a book, and I'm instantly drawn to it. The book is a law book. I liked the book so much that I took it to school the next day to read it. That was when I decided I wanted to become a lawyer, and I plan on starting college next year to pursue that dream. The reason I'm telling you this is because I would later find out that the book had belonged to my grandmother. And at one point in time, she herself had been in law school, but never graduated. There's always been small coincidences such as these that have made me feel connected to her, as if she were still there. Now, this is where things begin to get weird. For as long as I can remember, I hear things at night in the attic and walls. The obvious answer would be animals, but I've heard animal sounds in the attic before. Scratching, scampering, squeaking. But that's not what I hear. It's thuds. Heavy things being moved around. High heels was very common when I was younger. My sister and I had bedrooms on one side of the house, and my parents on the other. For years, my sister and I have been complaining about the noises, but my parents have never been able to find something or hear anything themselves. Everything I've told you so far is interesting, but I didn't consider it enough to share it. But things have been getting weirder lately, and I've become genuinely concerned. Personally, I've always believed in spirits and that there may be one in this house, but I never had anything besides noises and feelings to back it up. That was until now. A few weeks ago, I was having a bad day. So bad, in fact, I was sitting on my bed sobbing. This may seem dramatic, but I felt the need to open my arms wide and release my emotions. And that was the first time it happened. I heard something and I looked up. The cords on my fan were swinging back and forth rapidly. My fan wasn't on, and my arms weren't long enough to reach the cords. I even tried to stretch and touch them from where I had been sitting, but I was at least 2 to 3 feet away from even being close. Now we are to the reason I'm making this post. About 30 minutes ago, I was sitting on my bed watching a show when I heard a noise. I look up, and only one of the cords was moving, and fast. My fan wasn't on. I put my hands around the cord to feel if maybe air had done it, although that doesn't explain how only one would be moving without the other being affected at all. I'm honestly freaked out and would appreciate any thoughts or suggestions. I don't understand what is happening, but I want to. Thank you for listening to my story. I had been experiencing many strange sounds and feelings last year. My cousin had a party at my house, and without my knowing had brought a Ouija board and played without my knowledge. I didn't know until recently. Keep in mind that my room is in the basement. Any and every sound in the house I could hear, and most of the time I can tell exactly what it is. It was just me, my mom, sister, and 2 dogs in the house. I had been hearing loud footsteps all around the house, mostly when it was just me home. They were heavy like a man's footsteps, too heavy to be my mom or my sister's, and I began to smell this rancid smell floating around the house. I'll be downstairs cleaning in the basement, and it'll pass by me so suddenly, I'd actually thought I made it up. Then I'd be anywhere else in the house, and it'll settle for just a few minutes and then pass by once again. This happened for several weeks. Then it progressed at random objects flying down off the shelves. At one point, a cup actually almost hit me as I was walking past my bookshelf. After about a month or two after the first incident, I started seeing a dark, shadowy silhouette in the basement, just across from my room. Now, I'm not one that scares easily, but after so many weeks of these incidents, I had increasingly become more and more paranoid. Until seeing it for the first time, I was so scared I couldn't shut my door fast enough. It was like that every night, seeing it in the same spot. Soon enough, I began to see it all around my house, down the hallway, in the dining room. And despite being afraid, I tried to ignore it because if I didn't feed into what it wanted, it couldn't hurt me. Or I thought it couldn't. About 2 to 3 weeks after seeing it for the first time, I had woken up with scabbing scratches down my back, slight bruising as well. That was the only case of something physical in that matter. Sometime after that, I had a dream involving the entity. In the dream, I was standing on the dock watching the water, when I noticed a child standing at the end of it. The little boy fell in, and I ran to him. Jumping into the water, all I saw was the child being dragged under. Only its eyes were dark and hollow. It was like big pools of black ink. Then, as I'm trying to grab for him, I had this feeling of dread. Then I'm grabbed and I'm faced with the same entity. Only this time, I can actually see its face, pale and white, with the same black eyes like empty sockets. Its face stuck in this silent scream. As I woke up, I had sleep paralysis and started going through some of the steps I have to do to get out of it. After that, the incident slowly waned, until finally I had a friend of mine cleanse the house and do a blessing. Ever since then, I hadn't had any more incidents. I don't really know how to make sense of all of this. Update. My sister A, who is 12, recently came to me and described feeling uncomfortable in certain areas of the house and said she's been seeing the same black silhouette of the same woman who I used to see. She also had been having nightmares of this entity watching her sleep and following her around. I still have not had any more experiences. I was wondering what anyone's thoughts about why she's suddenly being affected after so long. I've never explained what I experienced to her, which makes this all the more worrisome. I've lived in eastern Kentucky my whole life. I grew up way back in the holler, the last house on the road, deep in the woods. I lived with my grandparents the majority of my childhood, and if I wasn't there, I was next door at my mom's house. Those woods have always gave me a creepy feeling. I have felt stuff watch me. I have felt things touch me. I have seen stuff that I can't explain. I'll tell a few happenings that have happened to me and my family. When I lived with my grandparents, I would sleep with my mamaw. My papaw slept in the other bedroom because they both snored really loud and would keep each other up at night. My grandma's bed was right beside the window, facing the woods. My side of the bed was right next to the window, and in the summer, she would keep the blinds up and open the screen on the window and turn the fan on high. Kentucky summers are extremely hot and humid. I remember many nights laying there and not being able to close my eyes because I would feel something watching me from those woods. I would lay there and stare into the darkness, hoping that I wouldn't see whatever it was, and that it would go away. I would lay there for hours at a time. My whole family would see these little small figures dart around the house, across the hall from bedroom to bedroom. My mom had witnessed a lot in this house. One morning, my grandpa had taken my mamaw to work. She would go in at around 6:30 a.m. She never got her driver's license, so my pap had always taken her to and from where she needed to go. My mom was getting ready for work that morning and thought my papaw had come back home from town. She said, "That was quick," and he didn't reply. She said she heard him rustling through the cabinets like he does every morning, working on making coffee. She said she even heard him spit in his spit bottle. My papaw had chewed tobacco for as long as I can remember. She heard the recliner being opened and went into the living room, and no one was home. She left for work as soon as possible after that. Living in the double wide we had beside my grandma, I would sleep with my mom most of the time. The heat never circulated very well to the other side of the trailer for some reason, and in the winter it would get really cold. Her bed was facing the master closet and master bathroom, and my side of the bed faced the master bathroom. I couldn't tell you how many times I seen this, but I would see a woman sitting in the bathroom floor in the fetal position. She would be crying, and she would look up at me every now and then. I would tell my mom about it, but she would just tell me to go back to sleep. The nights I would sleep in my bedroom, I would see what looked like trolls in my closet, scampering around. I would shut the closet door, but by the morning, it would be ajar. The property, woods, and land had something on it, whether it be an Indian burial ground or whatever. But being up there after dark, now as an adult, I still feel stuff watching me. Some stories my grandpa had told me from the 50s. My papaw is super religious, the type that if he tells a story and he messes up one fact, he will soon correct it and say, "Lord, forgive me." So I know for a fact that these are the God's honest truth. My papaw grew up in a one-bedroom house here in the county, not too far from where I grew up. Him and his brother, my uncle, were around 15 or 16 and were sitting on the back porch of their house, just talking and laughing, probably drinking coffee. He swears on his life that up in the sky, maybe 500 feet, a 3-paneled door appears, not in cloud form, but an actual door. He said that the door was white and it had a small lit lantern at the bottom of the door. He said that they watched it for hours. It just sat there. They could see the flame flickering in the lantern. He said after a few hours, it just completely disappeared. Another one he told me was about his dad, my great-grandpa, and his dad, my great-great-grandpa, fishing with another father and son one night on the North Fork of the Kentucky River. They did this about once a week, around midnight. Not sure why midnight. Maybe better fishing? Anyways, they were heading back to town, upriver, and they started hearing a funeral hymn getting closer and closer. They stopped the boat on the riverbank and said that a boat was floating towards them with nothing but an old hickory casket in it. Sat there in amazement and scared to death. He said that he could have reached out and touched the casket. That's how close it was. The other father and son said, "Well, I think that's a sign for us to go home." I don't think they ever went night fishing again. I've got several other stories that have happened to me and to my family. I might make another post later on. Eastern Kentucky has some serious paranormal activity. I'm going to school for video production, so I'm thinking about making videos of people's stories here. My husband and I bought a townhouse back in September of 17, and we've had super weird things happen since. Most of these experiences have happened on our second story. For background, where the stairs come up, my office is immediately to the left. Then there is a long hall to the right with the hallway bathroom. The laundry room just past that. My son's room on the other side. And then the master bedroom at the very end of the hall. The access to the attic is in the master bedroom closet. As our family goes, it's me, my husband, our son, and 2 large dogs. When we first moved in, our son was only 2, maybe 3 years old, and had just started making full sentences. He would be playing all day without any issues, but whenever it started to get dark outside, he started getting nervous and wouldn't want to be in his room. He had come downstairs at one point saying, "Mommy, do you hear it?" "Hear what, kiddo?" "The baby's crying, Mommy." My son is an only child, so you can imagine my confusion at this. I came upstairs with him and I asked him where he was hearing it from, thinking he may be hearing the neighbors through the walls. He took my hand and pulled me towards the master bedroom, stopping just short of the threshold. He pointed to the darkest corner of the room and said, "Over there. The baby is crying over there." My body went numb at this point, but I tried to brush it off and told him that there is no baby and he is just imagining it. This persisted for about a month before he finally stopped talking about the crying baby. During this time, I had been doing research on our house, and there had been no deaths in the house that I could find, let alone any kids that lived in the house before us. A few weeks after my son stopped mentioning the baby, I started hearing scratching noises right above my bed in the attic. I told my husband, and he thought we had a raccoon or some other animal in the attic. He went up a few days later, and there was nothing. I'm normally a heavy sleeper, but at least twice a week I would wake up to a faint scratching noise right above me. I did my best to ignore it and try to go back to sleep. This seemed to work, as we hadn't had an issue for a while up there until recently. I have always felt somewhat uneasy on the second floor, but I just attributed it to the past paranormal experiences growing up and being a little paranoid. Now I'm thinking my senses were on point. A few months ago, my husband and I were talking about how our son had this weird affinity for the crying baby when he was younger, and I had mentioned that one day, when I was taking a nap, I woke up abruptly to being sideways on the bed with one leg hanging off towards the closet, almost like I was being dragged towards it. However, I don't remember being pulled at all, and I do flop around a lot in my sleep, so I brushed it off. After I told my husband about this, he frowned a little bit and said he had a weird experience too recently. Apparently, he woke up one morning at around 2:30, 3 a.m. and saw a figure standing by his side of the bed. He said it was all black and he couldn't really make out a face or any distinct features. He went to kick the figure, thinking someone may have broken into the house, and his foot went right through the figure. This freaked him out a little, but he is a firm believer that if you don't acknowledge paranormal things, they can't do anything. So of course he rolls over and goes back to sleep and doesn't even think to mention it to me until I told him about my experience. The whole time we have been here, the dogs will randomly get spooked or will stare at something that I don't see. Every once in a while, our wolf hybrid, who is typically scared of his own shadow, will get very upset and his hair will stand on end and he will emit a low but vicious growl. Our other dog is a Malinois black lab mix, but she is getting old, 10 years old now, and doesn't really do much other than sleep on her bed and try to get all the pets and treats from us. And this brings us to the present. Yesterday, there was a decent storm that came through our area. It was semi-dark out and thunder every once in a while. I am working from home during the virus pandemic, and my mom had come to pick up my son at around 11:30 a.m. so I can work in peace without my son continuously bothering me. A few hours later, I'm listening to a podcast while working, and I hear a faint mumble that almost sounded like, "Mommy?" The chilling thing is that it sounded exactly like my son. I turned around to tell him that he needed to go back to his room and not bother me while I was working. But as I was turning around, I remembered that he wasn't even home. I was here by myself with the dogs. There was no one behind me and no one down the hall. At this point, I try to brush it off thinking my mind is playing tricks on me when my wolf hybrid starts losing it. All of his hair goes straight up. He gets between me and the door and starts doing his low growl. This freaked me out a little bit, but I told him to stop, which he listened and laid back down, but without taking his eyes off the hallway. About an hour later, I was in the zone with work and was talking with a coworker on our team chat. They sent me something funny enough to make me audible laugh. I then heard a tiny giggle that sounded exactly like my son coming from his room down the hall, who still isn't home at this point. I nearly fell out of my chair at this point with how scared I was. I got up and checked all the rooms upstairs, but I was home alone like I thought. I had to get back to work as we were starting to get busy, but I was on edge and straining to hear if anything else was happening behind me. About 10 minutes later, I hear the crash of something relatively small, but still loud, downstairs. My dogs run down the steps while I followed behind them. My PlayStation controller, which was originally on the charging stand behind the TV, was in the middle of the living room floor. This made my blood run cold, as we had not have anything physically moved yet, and I had a full-blown panic attack. I called my husband, who was already on his way home, and said he would be here soon. When he got home, everything seemed to stop. This all happened from about 2 to 4:30 p.m. in the middle of a little thunderstorm. I have looked into it, and from what I gather, when something can mimic voices like that, it's typically evil or demonic. Should I be worried? What do I do in this situation? I don't want to scare my son, and we can't move. But I am extremely paranoid and scared to be home right now. Any help is appreciated at this point. I apologize if this may sound all over the place. I'm trying to write down as fast as I can what I can remember of this situation. So, my dad was all excited to finally buy this gorgeous one-story brick house in Indigo Lake, Texas, Magnolia. That was gargantuan. So elegant, refined, copious amounts of land to run around, a visit of sylvan charm. No annoying neighbors, unless they were on the road. Brought out all of our belongings and finally came face to face with what was going to be a beautiful nightmare. As we unpacked and arriving at the steps, immediately strange things started to happen. The protector door opened by itself, and even the grand door that led inside the house as well just creaked loudly as if it were telling us to go inside. My dad thought carpenters were working there, as it was still being worked on, but only a day or two to finally complete it. My brother and I exchanged confused glances and noticed the back of the house had this weird looking pond. Behind the pond was a vast forest that had this sort of small cavern grotto, which made absolutely no sense. We were wrapped in complete forest, so it was pretty fucking creepy. Stepping inside, ignoring the doors opening, and we were completely astonished with how beautiful the house was. Still remember being 7 years old and in awe with so many things the previous owner had left. It was like going back in time. Exquisite paintings, china vases, samurai swords, a chimney with a moose taxidermy above. Oh my gosh, it was just beautiful. To the right, as soon as you walk in, was the kitchen, and a strip down that led to the washing machines as well as the backyard. To the left of the living room was a fork. Right side was going to be my parents' room. Straight led to a grand room, which we named an arcade room. It was a long hallway to get to the arcade room. Left of the arcade led to another hallway, but what was odd of this hallway was that there was a small shower and a toilet along with a long mirror that coated the wall and led to a door, which was my brother's room, and a closet. It made no sense. From my brother's room, it led back to the forked and living room, and the restroom was in the middle. The arcade room, Jesus, was so freezing cold. Even during summer, when you opened the windows, it was still freezing. Everyone who came over would complain about how cold it was. Dad thought it was just a small draft. Anyways, we had a foosball table, PlayStation system, video games, mini movie theater, even a gym in that arcade room. Night falls and my dad buys the Blair Witch Project. Yep, scared the hell out of me. Anyways, we were taking care of my uncle's sweet chihuahua named Brandy, who out of nowhere began barking furiously at a wall in the kitchen. She had all of her hairs standing up and a foamy mouth by how angry she was. I grabbed her and put her in the washing room where she just whined. My dad was dismissive on the idea that we were living in a haunted house, but that night after the movie ended was something I'm never going to forget, as this presence started to immediately show itself. So I made the decision to sleep in my parents' room for a while. In that room was a painting of a boy and a girl on a countryside, walking on a road next to a man behind them. I'm getting chills just being reminded of this painting. My brother is snoring in his room, and my parents were awake, and we began to hear loud furniture swinging, rustling across, nails scratching the walls, and these sort of chain noises coming from the attic with a sound as if someone was calling a dog. Just right then and there, man, my heart sunk, and I immediately knew this fucking place was haunted. Dad gets up and knocks on my brother's door, thinking he moved things, and nope, he's fast asleep. The noises were brushed off that it was just a raccoon and the forest trees swinging because of the wind. My heart is racing, just racing, and constantly thinking of the Blair Witch Project, which made it worse thinking it was real because, at the time, internet wasn't a popular thing to see if the movie was fake. Left a small nightlight on, and it was probably 11 or midnight when my parents fell asleep. As the night pressed, I dozed off and woke up. My parents are still sound asleep. The door of their room is completely opened, and I vividly remember we locked it. My heart is racing as I knew something was really wrong. At the foot of my bed, the end is sunken down as if someone was sitting on it, and I felt it sink down. You guys, I felt as if I was about to pass out and throw up, when suddenly the covers of my bed tossed and immediately felt these hands and fingernails tickle my feet. Man, I get chills remembering it. So I kicked back at whatever the fuck it was, and I could feel the hair on these hands. Just massively hairy hands and arms. I yelled, you guys. I cried. I fucking got up from a nest of blankets and somehow jumped straight into my parents' bed crying. My parents console me. Dad gets up, turns the lights on, and I'm done. Right then and there, I'm crying in my mom's shoulders when I don't want to live here anymore. After consoling, my dad and mom are somewhat wanting to believe me, but they just can't. That night, I slept in between them. I didn't sleep. My eyes were glued to the door, waiting for it to open. I didn't sleep. Next day comes, and my brother is working out in the arcade room as he played varsity football in high school. He comes rushing to us saying he saw a little girl's feet with frilly socks on near the hallway, with the lengthy mirror. My dad doesn't believe it, but he became a believer eventually. Gonna go ahead and post the experiences as this is getting way too long. Our fear reached the zenith. So, a couple nights later, my dad is in the bathroom. He had a habit of urinating sitting down at night so no one gets interrupted sleep-wise. From the windows, the moon is able to reflect some light that gallantly pierced through. As my dad is urinating, he notices my mom is at the door and says he will be done. So he does his thing, and right as soon as he is about to pat my mom on the back for her to go in, my dad goes right through the silhouette, making him fall. That night, I remember him finally becoming a believer and shouting at us to come out and turn on all the lights. Dad was pale as a ghost, but I was relieved that I wasn't fucking crazy. Water always turned on as well. Bath water, even the small shower where the long mirror hallway was. One time, after a party finished and everyone went home, I always took long baths with my action figures and had a huge curtain that covered the bath. My mom sometimes would use the bathroom whenever I showered, so I heard her walk in and noticed the shadow pass and would just say, "Hey, Mom," but no response. So whatever off I played, and upon finishing the bathroom door was wide opened. I came out asking my mom why she didn't close the door, and she said she didn't use the bathroom and was outside cleaning up. Now that scared the shit out of me. A lot of shit went on in that house. We had family friends stay the night to look over the house while we went on a trip. The following night, they called us saying they were leaving because they were getting spooked. The couple kept having dreams of a handsome man with hairy hands touching them, and that he would laugh a lot, and his wife said that the painting in my parents' room was moving. She noticed the kids in the painting moving, and the television in that room turned on, and the volume would flood up so high to the max. They left in the middle of the night, after a few hours. We were all painting the fence of the house and saw neighbors jogging on the road. They approached us and told us that our house had belonged to an artist who committed suicide in our garage. No one ever got close to him, as he was always reserved and spoke to no one. But joggers would see him with art supplies all the time. No one ever knew who the girl was that my brother saw. Right then and there, my mom called her mom, who is a spiritual person, and told her to make an incense and just walk around and talk kindly to the man for him to leave the house. After the small ritual, we never felt anything. Looking back, it feels odd to have been scared. Maybe he was just really lonely and in a dark place at the time, and was just playing with me, wanting his presence to be acknowledged. The carpenters even mentioned they would see a girl roaming around our pond with this strange face scarf on. Funny thing is, my mom stayed at home while my dad worked and my brother and I were in school. She never experienced or heard anything. Anyways, we ended up selling the house because it was flooding a lot. And the creepy part about the grotto in the back of the house near the pond was that after coming back from evacuating the floods, we found so many dead animals stacked on each other. Dogs, geese, cats, 2 horses, and owls. I mean, just, ugh, it gives me the shivers every time. The arcade room was still frozen cold as well. haven't been back, but I would be more than happy to share the paintings he had in the house. All of his belongings are in a storage rental warehouse. So, this happened 7-ish years ago when I was 16 or 17, and I was living independently for the first time since leaving the local children's home. The building I lived in was a very old cottage that was once used as a pigsty before being converted on a caravan site that used to be a farm. The place was still freezing cold and always had a weird vibe about it, and a bunch of odd things happened there. But this was the main thing that stuck with me by far. At some point whilst living there, probably around the 6-month mark, I lost my keys. It didn't matter to me much because it was so out in the sticks, rural Wales, UK by the way, that I felt I could confidently leave it unlocked with no bother, and I was able to easily get spare keys for the other ones that were on the ring. Whilst not being too worried or thinking that finding them was very urgent, I did search the place top to bottom for them multiple times over the next 7 to 8 months, but never found them. Nor did I come across them when I had organized cupboards and drawers or moved furniture around. They were just completely gone. One morning, I woke up at around 10 or 11 a.m. and came straight through into the kitchen. The place was a long rectangle with 4 rooms in a row from right to left: bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and tiny hallway with front door and living room. To make myself a coffee as usual, and there, right in the middle of the kitchen counter in front of the coffee pot and the kettle, as if I had just left them there the night before, were my keys. As you can imagine, I was floored by the perceived nonchalance these inanimate objects were sitting there with, and instantly my thoughts turned to sleepwalking, downright forgetfulness, etc. But I still knew in the back of my mind that none of this explained it. I went to grab them and instantly dropped them because of the searing pain in my hand. They were hot, like metal baking tray straight out of the oven hot. Hot like they had been sitting under the sun on a corrugated metal roof all day in high summer heat. I made myself coffee, making sure not to touch them, left them there all day, then eventually picked them up and hung them on the hook next to the door. Didn't lose them again. Some other things that happened there were hearing a woman crying outside my window during winter when there were no guests staying in the caravan/camping section of the park, which was in a different build anyway. Repeatedly waking up to find a suited man sitting at the end of my bed in the middle of the night. Not sure if it were dreams, but never felt like it was dreams. Doors opening and closing that I knew were not opened and closed before. Wardrobe being opened and things being dragged out of it whilst I was out of the room. This happened a lot, no matter how I stacked things in there, etc. The door on it was one of those that you have to push inwards for it to release the catch, and open outwards, if you get what I mean. TV turning on and off by itself, light flickering and bulbs breaking way more often than is normal. It could have been faulty wiring, of course. Extra cold and warm spots throughout the building, which I often walked through or felt forming and dissipating next to me. I used to sleep with an electric blanket under my bottom sheet and 2 or 3 blankets on top of me. I would occasionally wake up freezing with 1 or 2 of the top layers on the other side of the bedroom. No way I could have kicked them that far in my sleep. Once I woke up with my bed a foot away from the wall. It was a divan bed with wheels. We are not in an area that experiences earthquakes or anything like that. Anyway, I moved out when I was 17, and social services don't put kids there anymore due to some unrelated issues I had with the landowners, which I am glad about in my respects. Feel free to ask questions and share your similar situations. I really enjoy reading those. I am 23 now. This happened and started when I was about 3 or 4. Everything that happened that night, I remembered like it was yesterday. The memory is so vivid and forever in my mind. The second floor of my house at the top was really just a small landing with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom off of it. Immediately at the top, to your right, was my bedroom, the bathroom adjacent to the stairs. Then, my sister's bedroom, and then my parents' bedroom. My mom would put my sister and I to bed at about 7 o'clock every night. I always had issues falling asleep as a kid, but would eventually drift off. My bedroom had a closet next to the door, and next to that, 2 windows with a dresser sitting between them, with my bed pushed against the wall, foot into the bed near the door. One night, not unlike any other, we were put to bed and I finally fell asleep for a few hours, after just laying there, only to wake again some hours later. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning. I rolled over to scan my room. I've always been afraid of the dark, so the room was lit up by my nightlight plugged in at the very end of my bed. Standing in front of the window furthest from me near the closet, I saw what I thought at the time was an angel, quite literally glittering gold in front of my eyes, standing at least 7 feet tall, staring out the window. My movement must have grabbed its attention because immediately its head turned to look at me. There were no facial features except for a strong defined jawline. Though faceless, it wasn't like a freaky faceless. At this point, I was more curious than afraid. Then it started to yell at me. It kept telling me to shut up. Shut the hell up. The yelling quickly turned into screaming, and I started freaking out. I was one giant goosebump, and I got up from bed, opened my door, and looked into the lit hallway. My parents always left that light on at night in case my sister or I needed something or got scared in the middle of the night. Almost in slow motion, I noticed the air felt too still. Something was off. Before I could process anything, I took one step forward and out of the bathroom shoots this thing. It gets right in my face, screaming a blood-curdling scream that still echoes in my ears to this day. The face of this thing was just gray and sinister. Eyes completely blacked out, skin cracked, no lips, just a black, hollow hole with the screams coming from it. Long black hair flying around as if it were a fan behind it. I fucking lost it. I screamed so loud I could swear the entire house shook. I barged into my parents' bedroom, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. My mom looked scared and confused. My dad just terrified. I don't remember what happened after that. I'm sure I told my parents what happened and ended up sleeping with them for the next few weeks. Growing up, I asked my mom about that night and she explained how I barged in, crying, rambling off about some story about an angel or something. Today, I don't know what the fuck I saw. My dad, on the other hand, never said much about it and instead started warning me to stay away from Ouija boards and told some freaky stories about stuff that had happened to him. As my parents divorced, growing up, things got worse with respect to what I was being exposed to. My dad would show me scary pop-up videos and play creepy music. I was 6 or 7 at this point. Safe to say, I hated going to my dad's because I thought whatever to me that night was somehow connected to him. Eventually, my mom remarried. We moved and things were okay. Then I decided to stop seeing my dad completely. For more unrelated reasons. I was 9 years old at this time. That's when things started again. The air was ridiculously heavy all the time. I hated sleeping in my room. I always felt like there was something at the end of my bed just watching me. I tried to ignore it. For 9 years, constantly living in fear. We moved out of that house to somewhere around the corner once my mom and my stepdad divorced. That way, we wouldn't have to switch schools. I was about to graduate high school, and my sister still had 1 more year to go. I still had access to the old house, as my stepdad still lived there. They were using my old bedroom for storage and always kept the blinds closed, as had I when I was living there. One morning, when everyone in my old house was at work, my friend and I decided to sesh in the garage quickly. We had the okay from my ex-stepdad to do this, as long as we weren't driving anywhere afterwards, obviously. We walked through the front door, through the foyer to the garage, and got settled. I could already feel the extra 10 pounds on my chest, and I really wanted to make this quick. I had previously spoken with a friend about what I was feeling in this house, as we had been friends for years at this point, but never gave her much context, meaning what happened to me when I was a kid. Not even 5 minutes into our sesh, we heard the footsteps. Above the garage is a very old bedroom. My entire body went cold. My friend immediately looked at me. We waited another second, heard them again, this time like a stomp type running around the room. We said fuck it, packed up and got the hell out of there. I locked up and walked down the driveway completely freaked, trying to push the 1,000 thoughts running through my mind out of my head. Then my friend let out a tiny shriek. I turned back and immediately asked her what's wrong. They were doing some work. I thought she could have stepped on a rogue nail or something. Horror was written across her face, and I looked up at the window, but the blinds were closed. I asked her again what was up. She said for whatever reason, she felt like she needed to look up at my old bedroom window. She said the blinds were open, and in the window, looking down on us was, and I quote her words, this thing. It had black hair, black eyes, cracked skin, a just hollow black hole for a mouth. What the fuck? She said this so fast, terror oozing out of every word she was saying. Then she burst into tears, as did I. I was too freaked to tell her what happened when I was a kid, and I didn't want to freak her out even more. I suggested we get the hell out of there. Since then, nothing's happened. I recently traveled to Rome, specifically the Vatican, and got a blessed St. Michael pendant for extra measure, seeing as whatever it was following me in silence throughout the years. The thing hasn't bothered me, other than showing up in a very specific nightmare I had every 8 to 10 years since my first experience. If this thing is still on my tail, I'll be due for a nightmare within the year. If anything else happens, I will update. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true haunted house stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.